the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex in Cape Canaveral, we bring you Rocket Talk from NASA's Now and Next, as we are so glad to have you here for Rocket Talk alongside Josh Barrett from Boeing. This show is all about Boeing and the great things that they are doing. And man, if you're out here at Cape Canaveral, this is a perfect place to stop and see everything that's going to be happening in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
And more, hopefully.
And of course, we talk about Boeing and their great involvement of helping get this next set of rockets going into the ISS. And you guys have had such a great history with NASA, even really from the beginning of human space travel.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of funny because everyone knows Boeing because we make airplanes. A lot of people who are coming here probably got here on a Boeing jet. But another fun fact that we like to say is that every human spacecraft that America has ever flown was built by Boeing.
And it's pretty special. You take a look at even the Mercury and Gemini program. You guys were right part of the conception of space travel, weren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Since the very beginning, Alan Shepard on a Mercury capsule, which was built by a heritage Boeing company, through Gemini to Apollo, the Space Shuttle Orbiter, the ISS, which is a future destination for this thing behind us. So, you know, really since the Space Coast became the Space Coast, Boeing has been here.
But of course, we've been talking about on Rocket Talk, the commercial crew program and all the great involvement that you guys have been having. That's what is great to talk about Boeing, is that, well, this is new and cutting edge to have Boeing and NASA be in this joint venture as far as the commercial crew program. It's really been that way since the beginning of space travel.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people don't really realize, is that NASA's really biggest job is to bring a lot of companies that do this kind of work together to do something bigger. You know, that's kind of what you see with the Space Launch System. The commercial crew is a little bit more of a newer paradigm, but you know, Boeing has been NASA's partner for a really long time, since, you know, the early 60s, late 50s, when we started launching people to space from just a couple miles down the road. And it's been exciting here ever since. And I think there's a lot more exciting things to come.
We talked to Eric Boe and all the great things that he's doing. He's about to go up in a couple of months in a capsule like the one we see behind us. And talk to us a little bit about the Starliner program and the foundation of it and how it's come along the last couple of years.
Yeah, so it started before the end of the space shuttle. You know, the U.S. wanted a way to take our own astronauts into space after the space shuttle was retired. And actually, we work with Chris Ferguson, who was the last guy to land the space shuttle. He was the last commander of the space shuttle. And he's going to go back up on the Starliner, along with Eric Boe, who you talked to, and Nicole Mann, who's actually, this is a cool fact about Nicole. She's going to be the first female to ever fly a new vehicle. So, you know, we're doing lots of firsts here. Yeah, so after the space shuttle retired, you know, NASA wanted a way to get their own astronauts back to the space station. There was a competition with a lot of different companies, and we were eventually selected to build the Starliner and fly NASA's astronauts, and that will be coming soon.
Now you take a look at, obviously, you talked about Boeing, known for air travel, and now the other really cool fact about the commercial crew program is the fact that not only is Boeing going to be known for air travel with tourists and getting down to Florida Space Coast, but in the next couple of years, you're going to be known for getting tourists and individuals in space travel, because once you guys get certified with the CCP, you guys are going to be able to take individuals out of space as well.
Yeah, well, that's one of the coolest things I think about this program. I talked about earlier how you know, NASA has worked with space companies since the beginning, but the really cool part about the commercial crew program is that Boeing doesn't just build the Starliner and then give it to NASA like we did with, you know, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, the space shuttle, and, you know, NASA kind of owns and operates the vehicle itself. With the Starliner, Boeing owns it, and NASA basically just rents seats on the Starliner. And so essentially they're buying 4 seats for NASA and partner nation astronauts, so we'll have international astronauts coming here to fly on the Starliner as well. But right now we also have a 5th seat that we have the ability to sell, like you said, to tourists.
You take a look at what's happening with the commercial crew program. So much is happening in 2019 as you guys get set for some of the test flights. What is it like for you guys getting prepared to first launch this vehicle for its autonomous tests and then getting it prepared for human space travel?
It's a lot of preparation, like you said, but and again, kind of coupled onto the fact that we're kind of owning and operating the vehicle is the second part of that we're actually operating the vehicle. We have to learn how to launch, we have to learn how to do the on-orbit operations, we have to learn how to land it. That's another exciting part. The Starliner is the first orbital American capsule that'll land on land. Which is a tough thing to do that the Americans have never pulled off before. So we're really excited to go recover the capsule out in the western U.S., bring it back here to what we call the Commercial Crew and Cargo Processing Facility, or C3PF. We're going to refurbish it. And that's another thing that no other company or really space agency has done before, is reused an orbital capsule. You know, the space shuttle was very revolutionary because it was a vehicle that has gone to space and been reused, and we're taking a lot of the lessons learned from the space shuttle and applying it to the Starliner. For example, a lot of the thermal protection that we're using on the Starliner comes straight from the shuttle because it works. And we know it can be reused. It's been tested multiple times. And so once we refurbish the Starliners here, we will put them back on an Atlas and send them back to space.
And you talked about, obviously, people familiar with the Apollo missions, they're familiar with the capsules. What is the difference between this new Starliner capsule and what we saw in the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo program?
Well, we actually get a lot of questions because this does look like an Apollo capsule, the gumdrop capsule kind of thing, but physics does not change. The guys in the 60s were pretty smart, and they figured out that a capsule that size is about perfect for re-entering the atmosphere at the speeds it needs to. So again, we applied those lessons learned, said let's not reinvent the wheel here, but there's a lot inside of it that is new. The shuttle had, I think Chris likes to say, a couple thousand switches in it, just because the commander and the pilot sat there in the cockpit, and they literally every system, they had checklists to go through and go through their flight procedures, and this one has, a couple dozen. So it looks a lot more like a Boeing aircraft, like a 737, than a space shuttle, as far as the screen console goes. But otherwise, this is really tailored for the mission to get to the space station and back as safely as possible. We talked about the land landing capability earlier, the reusability factor earlier. So it's really just taken kind of the past half century of knowledge and experience and condensed it into something that is built to get to and from the space station with anywhere from 4 to 7 people as safely and efficiently as possible.
Obviously, we see the capsule behind us, so the question is, how does it get here from Kennedy Space Center to the ISS? And that's where your partner ULA comes in.
Yeah, United Launch Alliance is the most experienced company launching rockets that's flying right now, and they fly 2 kinds of rockets, the Atlas V and the Delta IV. And the Atlas V has, actually both sets of rockets have had a flawless flight record under ULA. And we are flying on the Atlas V because we liked that record that they have with safety. There's never anything easy about going to space when you're talking about a vehicle that is, using hundreds of thousands of pounds of thrust to get to essentially 18,000 miles an hour if you're talking low Earth orbit. So every piece of that rocket has to work, and that's why we went with the Atlas V.
Well, we see the Starliner behind us, and one of the great things is with this commercial crew program, the whole NASA moving kind of the slow-moving just up to ISS over to Boeing because they want to get right behind me on the right side. The SLS and deep space travel now really front and center, and that's pretty cool because you guys are a huge part of the SLS creation as well.
Exactly. Rockets like the Atlas V, like I said, hundreds of thousands of pounds of thrust. The SLS, millions of pounds of thrust. This rocket, over here, the it's a big model, but it does not do the actual rocket once it's on the pad over here at the Kennedy Space Center, Justice. It's on the scale of the Saturn V rocket. Visitors here can go see an actual Saturn V moon rocket over on the Kennedy Space Center when they come visit. But this thing is going to be a gargantuan rocket, and it's all geared to go to the moon and Mars and other deep space destinations. Another mission that NASA wants to do is send a probe to Europa, Jupiter's moon Europa, which they think is one of the most likely spots for life to exist because it's an ice-covered moon with water underneath it. More water than the entire planet Earth.
Is that what makes it so cool that it's kind of a generational thing that, you had the creation and the evolution of the shuttle, and then it went for its 25 year part, but now you guys are part of the next generation, and how special that is for Boeing to be a part of Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and now the shuttle and onto the SLS. It's got to be special to be a part of NASA's great history.
Yeah, it really is. I'm over at the C3PF, we work with people who are just starting their careers out of college, and they're learning from guys who learn from Apollo guys. And so it's really cool to see kind of that generational knowledge and people, from all walks of life, different ages, all coming together to send people to space, which is essentially, the next great thing humanity can do is go explore.
We can't wait to see what the future holds with the SLS. And for more on that, here's Savannah Collins.
I'm Savannah Collins at the Boeing facility here in Titusville, Florida, to meet with one of their engineers and learn more about the SLS rocket. And guess what? We're going to build our own rockets too. Let's go check it out. I have an expert who's going to help me out in building my own rocket today. We're going to have a little friendly competition, see who can build the best one. Joining me is Brandon Burrows, who works for Boeing. Brandon, tell me what you do.
Okay, well, so my name is Brandon Burrows, and I work at the Boeing Company. I'm a systems engineer here at the Kennedy Space Center site. So essentially I work on the field operations team here, where we basically do the final integration of the rocket right before launch. The Boeing team here is one of the people who help support all the different groups that it takes to actually get a rocket together before launch. I also spend a lot of my time in New Orleans as a task leader for the engine section of the rocket. And New Orleans, that's where we manufacture the rocket. So I spend about half of my time there making sure that everything is going well with the build of the rocket as we develop it and, hone in on the different things we have to do before it's ready. And then we ship it here to Kennedy Space Center and we launch it. So that's what I do.
So we're going to put your skills to the test today in building our own rockets. So here are the things that you're going to need to do this at home.
So I'm going to choose Boeing Blue for I'm going to call it the core stage. Boom.
Okay. So I need one on the edge right here?
Yeah, one on the edge going up and down.
Okay.
Kind of like close it off.
Okay.
And then you can push it back the other way and do it the same way on the other side as well. That gives you a nice little seal.
Okay.
And it's really important to have fins, definitely for a rocket like this, because it's so lightweight, so you need something to stabilize it. Boom, we got some fins. Oh, this is really coming together.
I know, it looks pretty good. So with our rockets, can you show me on this model SLS kind of where we are right now?
Okay, cool. So right now, this is basically what I would consider a core stage. So this is the part that Boeing builds for the SLS. Like I said, I work around the actual hardware a lot. So right now, where we are in the build is essentially all of this down is Boeing, not the boosters, just from here down. Right here is the forward skirt, which we're actually done with it. In the middle, we have the LOX tank, which is the liquid oxygen tank. And that's coming along too. It's right around the corner. It should be basically ready to go pretty soon here. Right here is called the intertank, which connects the liquid oxygen tank to the liquid hydrogen tank, all of this orange right here. And this is the engine section. And this is the part that I work on the most. And the engine section holds the 4 RS-25 engines, and that's where like all your plumbing is for like your pipes and stuff that that bring stuff from the liquid oxygen tank all the way down to the bottom, and that's where your controlled explosion starts, right in here. Next, we're gonna put our payload on there.
Okay.
Our payload being ping pong ball. In real life, it could be anything from food and supplies for astronaut or astronaut themselves. Next, we're gonna make the nose cone. You kind of want to start with like a square, so, and it doesn't have to be a perfect square, but just, I would think, just cutting out a decent sized square.
We know you have got it covered when it comes to the real SLS, but let's go outside, test out, and see whose rocket today is gonna fly the best.
Let's do it.
Surprised at how far these went. We did pretty good today.
I agree.
Thank you so much for telling me all about the SLS and working with me on these rockets. I know I am so excited to see what Boeing has in the future. And if you want to build one of these rockets at home, you can go to curiositymachine.org.
Well, great look at the SLS from Savannah Collins. And I am now joined with Rebecca Regan from Boeing. And how cool is this? We are right now inside the Starliner capsule. This is something you can see if you come to Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex and take a look at it. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, so if you come to this Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, guests will actually be able to look inside. And we really wanted guests to be able to see what astronaut living quarters would look like for the short trip to the International Space Station aboard the Starliner. But visitors won't be able to get inside like we are today, but we're able to take them in, with them. So what you're kind of looking at here is the Starliner capsule. It's outfitted with 5 seats right now. The Starliner is capable of carrying up to 7 passengers, or a mix of crew and cargo, but for missions to the International Space Station, we're going to take 5. So pretty cool the way that it's laid out. It does seem pretty small, but our resident astronaut, Chris Ferguson, likes to talk about, you're in your seats for an hour or two pre-launch, through launch and ascent, but once you get into orbit, you're kind of free to move about the cabin. And so if you think about the difference between commercial aircraft, flying on a Boeing 737, you're sort of confined to the floor beneath your feet, the sides of the airplane, but when you're in space and you're weightless, you're able to float up, kind of look out the window, look back at planet Earth. So it would be quite a different ride compared to just being on a commercial aircraft.
One of the cool things about the design of this capsule is that, from what I understand, whether you're short, whether you're tall, this capsule can really fit all walks of humans.
Yeah, so our crew and cargo accommodations engineers, 2 of them actually use themselves as test subjects. So that is a really interesting part. A gal named Melanie, she is pretty short, and a guy named Mike, he is very tall, just like yourself. So they did use themselves as test subjects. So I think it's 95th percentile female, 95th percentile male, which is much different than capsules of the past. You had to be within a specific height range, but now we can accommodate all kinds of astronauts and even tourists.
And while obviously the replica capsule is here at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, you guys are building the actual capsule right here on the complex as well, right next to the VAB.
Yeah, so this particular capsule served as a pathfinder for us. So we used it to figure out how we were going to lay out the seats, how we were going to lay out the console, which we can talk a little bit more about. And then engineers actually still come in here and bring over the astronauts. They'll figure out, where do we put fire extinguishers, or how is the astronaut going to reach certain switches and dials. Everything needs to be within their reach. In case anything goes wrong in space, they've got to be able to get to those critical assets. So this mock-up, even though it's here for visitors to see, we still use it on a fairly regular basis.
Well, that's one of the great things. We, of course, know how technology advances with phones and how they get better. And, of course, a space shuttle or spacecraft is going to improve as well, and this one is far more advanced than what we saw in the space shuttle time.
Yeah, so I think Josh mentioned thousands of switches and dials in this space shuttle, a few dozen here in the Starliner. But if you think about technology, you know, the big thing right now is touchscreen, and we will have touchscreens in the capsule. They'll be tablets that'll serve as flight manuals for the pilot and the commander. So we're getting rid of paper and being energy efficient in that way. But we really still need to have those tactile switches and dials because in space, you know, the acceleration forces as you're launching, as you're coming back down to Earth, you really need to be able to say, like, I switched that button, you know, I made that tactile switch. Because touchscreen won't always work. So lots of new innovations incorporated where we can, but also realistic expectations of how people can operate in space were important to us.
And for the safety of the future astronauts taking this capsule, one of the biggest differences as well from the shuttle is this capsule will have an abort on it as well, where obviously the capsule can come off the rocket as well.
Exactly, and abort systems of the past were a little bit different. Abort systems of the past were sort of a puller or a tractor system. Ours is known as a pusher, so we will have 4 really big launch abort engines beneath the service module of the Starliner. So right now we're in the crew module part. Below that is the service module, provides all the propulsion systems in space.
And of course, we talk about the biggest reason for the Starliner capsule is to get astronauts right up to the ISS. And not only will it be able to serve astronauts, but it's also going to obviously bring cargo up there as well. And this is a really spacious vessel, if you will, that can bring lots of cargo up to the ISS.
Yeah, so our requirement with NASA is up to 220 pounds. We have a little bit more capability than that, and it's really powered cargo too. So living samples, blood samples, things like that you want to be able to get back into the scientists' hands very quickly before gravity starts to degrade their experiments.
How's the autonomy of this vessel going to help as we move from the CCP, where astronauts are going up, to where we're going to see tourists going up, and obviously allowing more different people to go up as well, not just astronauts?
Autonomy really is the way of the future. It's really important for astronauts. You kind of think about what their main mission is. So for the astronauts, the NASA astronauts, their main mission is to go to the space station for about 6 months, perform critical research, and come back home. So we really see this as a transportation capability. So minimal time training, more time training for the real mission, because it's really only going to take anywhere from 6 to 24 hours to get to the space station. So not a whole lot needs to go into the training of astronauts or tourists, for that matter, to fly the Starliner.
Pretty cool stuff. Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Josh, that was a great look inside the capsule with Rebecca, the core of the capsule behind us. And it's amazing to think about the steps that it takes to build the Starliner capsule from conception to reality.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is what we call a pressure vessel. This was actually one of the first things we built for the program itself. And like I was telling you earlier, pretty much all that goes on the outside is thermal protection. Astronauts are on the inside, so that's, I guess, what the heart of a spacecraft looks like.
You think about what Boeing is involved in, and you talk about from the very first days of rockets taking off here to obviously the next generation and the Starliner program. Is there anything more that Boeing's involved in that we don't know about? It seems like you guys got your hand in everything.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, we don't just do airplanes. We got, the International Space Station. Boeing built all of the modules on the U.S. segment for NASA, and we continue to operate them. Pieces of the space station, as we continue to upgrade it, are still coming through Florida to go up on cargo missions and be installed by the astronauts. We're hoping that sticks around for a long time. It can go for a lot longer than it is right now. Then there's also this really cool thing called the Phantom Express. It is a space plane that is built to launch as rapidly as possible, turnaround time in 24 hours. We actually just did an engine test for it this year, where they tested the engine 10 times in 10 days, so that's kind of an idea of what they're looking at for how much it wants to launch. Another really cool space plane that I actually can't talk too much about, not because It's not just because it's a very super secret Air Force project. I also just don't know that much about it. It's called the X-37. It's the best way to explain it is a drone space shuttle. Yeah, it's a miniature drone space shuttle, but it launches on top of a rocket, spends a couple hundred days in space and comes back. And then there is also, like we talked about, the Space Launch System. We have a lot of people here at Boeing working on the Space Launch System, getting the Kennedy Space Center ready to support that giant rocket. So, you know, there's a lot going on right now and even more going on in the coming years.
Well, and that's what's really exciting is you think about 2019 and what's to come. It's going to be a huge year for Boeing as we really start to set what's going to happen with the Starliner, with ULC, and it's going to be a huge year for you guys.
Exactly. Starliner launching, we'll have the SLS launching soon. We'll have, you know, the X-37 will continue to launch. I don't know when, but it'll keep launching. And then, you know, we have our satellite programs too. You know, we build some of the most sophisticated satellites the country has over in California, and they come over here to launch GPS satellites. So, you know, you rely on Boeing satellites to, you know, navigate your way through Google Maps around. So, you know, there's a lot going on for us here at the Space Coast, and you know, we're really looking forward to the next couple of years as spaceflight takes off even more.
And what are we going to see in 2019 for you guys? What are your steps with the CCP to finally get this vessel certified?
So first, we have to do an uncrewed test flight, and that's, as you and Rebecca talked about earlier, an autonomous flight to the space station. And then we're going to do a crew flight test. And that's, like we were mentioning, Chris Ferguson, Nicole Mann, and Eric Bowe. One of the cool parts about that is Chris Ferguson is a Boeing astronaut. He's not a NASA guy. He used to be, but he's not anymore. And so that's a real first kind of for this program, and seeing private citizens go to space. And then after that, we will have our operational missions for NASA. And then, you know, hopefully we'll see more tourists. More researchers, more private citizens going and launching from the Space Coast.
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun, and of course we appreciate everything that Boeing's doing to help continue the great legacy of NASA and begin just getting us that trip to Mars. Begins obviously right behind us with the Starliner, and getting the astronauts back to ISS. It's going to be a fun year to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited.
Well, thanks so much, Josh, for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Rocket Talk. For all of our crew here, I'm Bernie Gunther. We'll see you next time. Want more Rocket Talk? Subscribe to our channel and be sure to check out our bonus features. Also, make sure to leave a comment so we can know what you'd like to see on an upcoming show.